When Morgan Tate stepped into the arena with scuffed boots, a sun-faded hat, and an unnamed horse by his side, the crowd burst into laughter. They called it a hillbilly stunt, a former combat medic lost among million-dollar show riders. But just a few steps later, the arena fell silent. Because that horse, Sage, wasn't just moving. He was telling a story no one would ever forget. Willow Creek, New Mexico was the kind of place time didn't bother with. A small town nestled deep in the valley, where wind and dust quietly chipped away at every brick and summer sun turned rusted tin roofs into stovetops. The red dirt roads curled toward the lone diner, the one pump gas station still hanging on, and a chapel whose bell hadn't rung since some long-forgotten Christmas. Around here, strangers weren't greeted with smiles. They were acknowledged with silent glances, and to many, Morgan Tate was a stranger just like that. She lived at the far end of Silver Dust Road, in a weathered wooden house with weeds crawling past a rotted fence and an old barn that leaned like it was bracing for one last storm. Folks said she'd once been a combat medic, served in Iraq during the bloodiest years, and saved more lives than anyone could count. But in Willow Creek, past service didn't buy respect. It only made people uneasy, especially when the person in question kept to herself, didn't attend church, avoided the big box store in the next town over, and above all, kept a wild horse. Sage was a silver-dappled Mustang, his only crime being that he didn't belong. He was the reason the local kids would sneak past Morgan's ranch, hoping to catch a glimpse through the fence. No one really knew where she'd found him. Some said she dragged him out of a canyon, legs soaked in blood, nothing but skin and bone. Others whispered he was stolen, because no one around here owned a horse that fierce, and yet that calm. But Morgan never explained. She just fed him, bathed him, and every morning spoke to him like she was continuing a story she'd been telling for years. Every day began with the creak of rusted hinges and the rich scent of black coffee on the porch. At 58, Morgan was wiry but strong, usually dressed in an old flannel shirt that had once belonged to her late husband, and a sun-bleached cowboy hat with a frayed brim. Her eyes, weathered but sharp, looked like they could read things people were trying hard to hide. A scar ran down her right forearm from elbow to wrist, the result of a mortar strike in Fallujah, 2005. She never covered it. Morgan didn't hide her past. She just didn't talk about it. Living with her in that faded house was Harper, a 15-year-old girl with deep brown hair and eyes full of quiet intelligence and lingering grief. She was Morgan's granddaughter, sent to live with her 3 years ago after her mother, Morgan's only daughter, died of pancreatic cancer. They didn't talk much about that death, nor about Harper's father, who disappeared like desert dust after the funeral. They just lived. Morgan taught Harper how to dress wounds on horses, how to bake cornbread without burning the bottom, and how to read people by the weight of a handshake. That morning began like any other, sunlight slicing through the window like a blade. Morgan circled the paddock with a mug in hand, eyes scanning the fence line. Harper sat on the porch steps, legs swinging, sketchbook in her lap. She was drawing Sage, his silhouette poised and alert, staring toward the horizon. "He looks like he hears something," Harper said. "Or like he's remembering." Morgan didn't answer. She just nodded slightly. Then came the sound, the low rumble of an engine, and the rise of dust far off down the road. A sleek black Ford F-250 with chrome trim pulled up, hauling a polished trailer behind it. Morgan didn't need to see the plates. She already knew who it was. Hunter McAllister. Everybody in San Miguel County knew that name. He owned hundreds of acres, dozens of racehorses, and an ego bigger than all the trophies lining the walls of McAllister Ranch. Sitting next to him was Brody, his only son, tall, handsome, with eyes that measured everything and found it lacking. Hunter got out first. He wore a silk shirt, a gator-skin belt, and boots so shiny they reflected the sun. He grinned wide when he saw Morgan, like he just stumbled upon a mildly amusing roadside attraction. "Well now, if it ain't the legendary Miss Tate," he drawled in a thick South Texas accent. "Heard you'd finally abandoned this shack. What do you want?" Morgan asked flatly. Brody slid his sunglasses up and looked toward Sage, who stood still near the fence. "What the hell is that? Some mangy wild thing you dragged out of a swamp?" Morgan didn't react. She turned and started walking back toward the house. "Hold on," Hunter said, raising a hand. "We ain't here to mock, though it's hard not to laugh." He pulled a colorful flyer from his pocket, the glossy kind that didn't belong in Willow Creek. It was for the upcoming San Mateo Horsemanship Showcase, the biggest equine show in the state. "Open competition," Hunter shrugged. "Anyone can enter, even wild horses and washed-up army medics. The crowd needs a little comic relief, you know what I mean." Harper stepped forward. "You came all this way just to insult my grandma?" Brody chuckled. "We're just telling it like it is. But hey, if you do show up in San Mateo, bring a smile. The audience will love it." Morgan took the flyer without a word. Hunter squinted at her. "Well then, good luck. You're gonna need a hell of a lot more than talent." He turned and climbed back into the truck. Brody gave Sage one last sneer before slamming his door. The engine roared to life, dust swirling around them like the wind was trying to erase their presence. Harper stared after them, fists clenched. "They don't know what they're talking about, do they?" Morgan looked down at the flyer. They'd folded it into quarters and slipped it into her shirt pocket. "No," she said quietly, "they don't. But they will." The next morning, Morgan pulled her late husband's old saddle out of storage. It was dusty but solid. She cleaned it slowly, rubbing every stitch and faded silver buckle. Sage stood still, eyes on her the whole time. When she lifted the saddle onto his back, no reins, no bit, no commands, he didn't flinch, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. In the early morning light, with Willow Creek's red earth glowing gold, a 58-year-old woman and a silver-gray Mustang stood side by side, two silhouettes carved from dust and wind. Forgotten by the world. But maybe, just maybe, ready to remind it of something it had never been prepared to see. That morning, Morgan sat at the old wooden kitchen table, sunlight streaming through a faded checkered curtain. She stirred her coffee absently, eyes fixed on the folded flyer lying next to the sugar jar. San Mateo Horsemanship Showcase. The words blazed in gold letters across glossy paper, overlaid on images of glistening show horses in dazzling costumes under glittering lights. That world felt 1,000 miles away, even though San Mateo was just a 5-hour drive from Willow Creek. Harper walked into the kitchen, still groggy, wearing an old band tee. Her hair was messy, tangled from a restless sleep. "You're up early," she said, her voice raspy. Morgan didn't answer. She nodded toward the flyer. "What do you think of this?" she asked. Harper poured herself a glass of water. "I think they're going to laugh." She paused. "But you already know that. The question is, are you going to let them laugh and walk away? Or make them fall silent because of the very horse they laughed at?" Morgan looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. There was something in Harper's eyes that reminded her of a younger version of herself. A kind of quiet defiance that didn't flinch in the face of judgment, even if it meant standing alone against the world. "You believe that horse can make them go silent?" Morgan asked. Harper didn't hesitate. "I don't believe in the horse. I believe in the way you look at him." That afternoon, they drove into town. Willow Creek wasn't big, just a few main streets, a bakery, a pharmacy, and a tiny grocery store that always charged more than the next town over. Still, everyone came here because it was the only place that sold horse feed. Morgan parked her battered red GMC pickup, its paint sun-faded, its bed scratched, and the driver's side door only opened if you lifted it just right in front of Roper Feed and Supply. She stepped out first, followed by Harper with her sketchbook in hand. The air inside was thick with the smell of oats, leather, and dust. Bags of feed were stacked like fortresses. Morgan walked straight to the counter, where a middle-aged woman was tagging horse oil tins. "1 sack of premium oats and a bag of mineral salt," Morgan said flatly. The woman, Loretta, nodded, then gave Harper a side glance. "Feeding that wild horse like royalty, huh?" Morgan turned to her. "Not royalty, just feeding him like any horse deserves to be fed." Loretta smirked. "Heard you're taking him to the showcase." Her tone was laced with condescension. "Crowd's gonna love it. Who doesn't enjoy a good comedy break between the real acts?" Harper clenched her sketchbook. "Sometimes the thing people laugh at is what silences them the longest." Her voice was soft but firm. No one replied. Morgan took the receipt and walked out without another word. That evening, Dr. Eli Granger pulled into the ranch gate in a dust-covered Jeep. He wore a flannel shirt, jeans smeared with dry mud. The new vet in town, Eli had the look of a man who'd seen a lot, but carried none of it with arrogance. Around Willow Creek, people called him a decent outsider. Unlike the wary air reserved for Morgan, he'd come of his own accord after hearing Sage was set to compete. "I want to do a quick health check on him, free of charge," he said, standing on the porch with Harper and Morgan, "just to make sure he's ready for the long drive. I saw you working with him last year during the big storm. Never seen a Mustang stay so calm with thunder cracking like that." Morgan hesitated. Harper nodded slightly. "Let him," she said. The checkup happened in near silence. Eli was careful, respectful. He examined the old scar on Sage's leg, the one Morgan had stitched herself with combat-learned skill and a steady hand. "Muscles still strong," he noted, "more flexible than most purebred show horses I've seen." Harper sat scribbling in her sketchbook, already filled with drawings of Sage, his stance, his movement, his stillness beneath evening skies. Eli tilted his head toward her. "You observe him really closely, because not everyone sees what matters," she replied. "Most people just see the coat. I see his eyes." Eli smiled, then looked back to Morgan. "I don't think Sage is just an ordinary Mustang." Morgan narrowed her eyes. "What are you saying?" "There used to be a line of horses called Aurelius," Eli said. "Not many remember it. I saw one when I studied in Montana. They were fast, unnervingly calm, and responded almost entirely through feel, not reins." Morgan didn't respond, but inside her, a seed of doubt, or maybe curiosity, began to root. That night, fireworks cracked in the sky far in the distance, a small county celebration nearby. The sound echoed across the valley like ghosts from another world. Morgan woke with a jolt, her heart pounding. For a moment she thought she was back in a field hospital in Fallujah. Green flashes, screams, smoke. Then she heard it. Soft hoofbeats tapping against the gate. She stepped outside, still trembling. Sage was standing there, eyes on her, unafraid. Morgan placed her hand on his neck. Warmth, steadiness, quiet. "I'm still here," she whispered, "and so are you." Behind her, Harper stood silently, watching. She didn't interrupt, she just turned to a new page in her sketchbook and wrote softly in pencil, "They laugh because they don't know, but when they know, they'll be quiet and they'll listen." Before sunrise, Morgan was already awake. The distant hoot of an owl near the cypress trees by the ranch stirred old memories, places she'd once lived, nearly died, and learned how to hold her breath through silence. Today, they were hitting the road. Harper had packed the night before. A few changes of clothes, her sketchbook, a water flask, and some sandwiches wrapped in brown paper. Inside a small tin box, she'd tucked away a handful of quick pencil drawings. Sage, walking through sunset light, scribbled notes reminding Morgan of posture, tension, rhythm before entering the arena. The old red GMC had been checked front to back. But no matter how much Morgan cleaned it, it was still a beat-up hunk of steel. Dented panels, scratched paint, with an AC that had died 2 summers ago. Hitched to it was the same trailer that used to carry lumber, now converted into a makeshift horse hauler. Sturdy wood floors, a plastic canopy for shade, and leather straps left over from her deployment days. "We'll take it slow," Morgan said, tightening a spare lead rope on the hitch. "We're not in a race, we just need to get there." Harper nodded, worry flickering behind her eyes. She circled to the back and opened the trailer door. Sage was already inside, quiet, waiting, as if he knew this wasn't just another morning. He took a deep breath, flicked his mane, and stepped into the trailer without hesitation. The road to San Mateo stretched across rugged terrain painted in shades of burnt orange and copper, southern New Mexico at its most raw. The sun poured through the windshield like stage lights, making Harper pull her old baseball cap low across her eyes. Sage remained still in the back, occasionally shifting his hooves or exhaling through the vent. The radio played a crackling rendition of Johnny Cash's Hurt, its hollow melody drifting out over the dusty plain. Morgan didn't sing along. She was listening to something else, an unfamiliar rattling beneath the hood. A clicking metal sound. Then a sharp hiss. Harper looked over. "Something wrong?" Morgan gripped the wheel. "Engine's hot, but we've still got some stretch left in her." But the sentence hadn't even finished before a loud pop rang out, followed by a cloud of black smoke billowing from under the hood. Morgan veered the truck off the road, gravel spraying as the vehicle rumbled to a stop in a plume of dust. "Not now," Morgan muttered, stepping out and popping the hood. The heat hit her face like an open oven. The radiator was bone dry, the hose split, one wire melted down to slag. Harper checked her phone, then shook her head. No signal, nothing. They stood there, stranded in the middle of nowhere. No shade, no coverage, just the blistering sun climbing higher and the shimmer of mirage on the asphalt. An hour passed. Morgan used their last bottle of water to douse the engine in vain, hoping for a miracle. Harper climbed into the trailer and patted Sage gently. "It's okay, boy. We'll figure it out." Then the sound of a vehicle in the distance. Not a mirage this time. A truck was heading toward them from the opposite direction, a long dust tail trailing behind. Harper stood and waved. Morgan squinted as the truck neared, and her heart sank. McAllister Ranch. Their logo was printed across the side in big, bold letters. "Damn it," Morgan muttered. The truck stopped a few yards ahead. The passenger door swung open, and Brody McAllister hopped down. Crisp white shirt, mirrored sunglasses, his sports drink in hand. Well, he said, scanning the scene like he was enjoying a sitcom. "Miss Tate, didn't expect to see you here, and with this thing?" Morgan didn't respond. Harper stood firm beside her. "I'm guessing your little Mustang couldn't handle the road trip," Brody sneered, walking toward the trailer. "Wild things don't belong on stage, you know." "Stay away from him," Morgan said coldly. Brody shrugged. "Just an observation. We'll be in San Mateo before sundown. But hey, good luck." He tossed his drink in the air, caught it, and climbed back into the truck. The McAllister vehicle roared off, kicking up dust in their wake, leaving Morgan behind, fuming, fists clenched on the wheel. She had never begged for help, and she sure as hell wasn't about to start with the likes of McAllister. Then another vehicle appeared behind them. This time, the engine sounded different, softer, familiar. Harper's eyes lit up. "It's Dr. Eli." The Jeep pulled up beside them, Eli stepping out, surprise on his face. "I was riding with the McAllister convoy to check on their show horses," he explained. "But the moment I saw that beat-up red truck, I knew." Morgan still looked skeptical. "You came to help?" "Of course," Eli said. "There's a free stall in the trailer behind their rig. I'll convince the driver to take Sage. No way we're letting that horse cook in the desert." Harper looked ready to cry with relief. Morgan didn't speak, just nodded, her eyes tight with emotion. She turned to Sage, who stood panting in the heat. "He's got somewhere to be." The transfer was swift and careful. Eli led Sage himself, while Harper whispered to the horse, her hand steady on his neck. "They laugh because they think we don't belong. But they forget. The one thing you can't train is heart." Morgan heard it. She turned away before Harper could see her eyes, glassy and full. As they continued the journey to San Mateo, Morgan sat in Eli's passenger seat. Behind them, Sage rested in a cooled, padded trailer with fresh straw and proper vents. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the sand. Morgan looked toward the horizon. She knew there would be no apology from Brody, no welcome party waiting, but she didn't need any of that. All she needed was a morning, just one, where Sage would step into that golden arena, and the ones who once laughed would have nothing left to say. The San Mateo Horse Showcase wasn't just an event. It was a world of its own. A world built on money, prestige, and names printed in shimmering gold on championship banners. When the trailer pulled into the competitor parking lot, Morgan stepped out wearing her sun-bleached cowboy hat, a threadbare shirt, and boots scuffed from decades of dust. Next to her, Harper held Sage's lead rope tightly. The silver-gray horse stood calm and quiet amid a sea of glossy trailers, shimmering thoroughbreds, and handlers in matching branded uniforms. "Do you think they'll know who you are?" Harper asked softly. "They don't need to," Morgan replied, voice raspy. "All that matters is Sage knows who I am." They walked along rows of stables, checking the registration sheet until they reached their assigned stall, Stall 17. It was at the far end of a dim corridor, where flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the air smelled like mildew and stale feed. A generator room roared nearby, the noise pressing against their ears. Stall 17's door creaked loudly. Its hinges were rusted, the wood cracked and warped. No engraved nameplate, just a scrap of paper duct-taped above the latch. Tate, unaffiliated. Harper wrinkled her nose. "They seriously stuck us in here?" Morgan didn't reply. Her eyes scanned the area, moldy straw, murky water buckets, the sour stink of old grain. One wall was scratched deep, likely from a terrified horse in the past. Anyone used this stall recently? Harper asked. Probably not for long, Morgan said. But we're staying, not to earn their favor, just to prove we never needed it. Meanwhile, just 2 aisles over was McAllister Ranch's designated zone, a groomed paradise for equines. Air-conditioned stalls, rubber mat flooring, personalized massage therapists for each horse. Brody McAllister rode a chestnut Appaloosa through the practice ring, his silhouette glowing in the afternoon light like something out of a photo shoot. When he spotted Morgan and Harper leading Sage through the lane, he turned his horse, blocking their path. Well, stall 17, huh? He smirked. Fitting. You know that used to be the sick bay? I once saw a rat crawl out of the hay rack in there. Morgan didn't react. She gently tugged the lead rope to walk past, but Brody nudged his horse forward again, blocking the way. Just a word of advice, he said, leaning down, voice low. When you fail tomorrow, don't blame the horse. He's just a mirror. And what you'll see in him is your own insignificance. Harper flushed red, ready to speak, but Morgan raised her hand to stop her. Her eyes were sharp as blades. You're right about one thing, Morgan said calmly. He reflects, and what I see in him isn't insignificance. It's trust. She led Harper and Sage past without another word. Brody watched them go, lips twisted in silent mockery, but he said nothing else. That night, stall 17 was darker than usual. One of the hallway lights had burned out, leaving only a bare hanging bulb above their stall. Sage didn't eat much. He stood still in the corner, his eyes dull, his breathing quiet. Morgan grew concerned. She stepped inside, laying her hand on his neck. His skin was warm, his lips swollen. Tiny blisters lined his gums. Harper stepped closer, hand covering her mouth. Grandma, look at this hay. The fresh bale of hay lay in the corner, stacked neatly earlier that afternoon. But when Harper lifted it, a sharp, pungent odor rose up, something bitter and chemical, not natural. Morgan crouched down, pulled a few strands apart, brought them to her nose. Then she knew. Capsaicin, she muttered. They tried to burn his mouth, make him panic, break his reflexes. It was them, Harper said, fists clenched. It was Brody. No one else would stoop that low. Morgan didn't respond. She fetched a bucket of cold water, added salt, and began rinsing Sage's mouth. Each time the horse shivered, Harper murmured softly to him, her hands stroking his mane in slow, calming circles. As they gently dried him with a soft cloth, a voice came from behind them. Be careful. If not treated right, that stuff can cause permanent damage to the mucus lining. Dr. Eli Granger stood at the stall entrance, his med kit in hand. The dim yellow bulb cast his shadow long across the barn floor. Morgan didn't flinch. You suspected this? Eli nodded. Stall 17 wasn't assigned at random. It's the easiest place for sabotage, and Brody has plenty of reasons to keep Sage off that stage. He knelt down, opened his bag, and pulled out a tube of bio-ointment and a small syringe with anti-inflammatories. Sage didn't flinch. He stood still, as if he understood this man meant no harm. This horse, Eli said, working with precision, isn't like the Mustangs I've studied. His muscle structure, neural response, resting heart rate, they suggest something deeper. Morgan tilted her head. Like what? Eli glanced up. Could be a trace lineage. I once interned in Wyoming. Saw horses from an old cavalry line. Aurelius. They were rare, almost extinct. Thought to be bred out. Intelligent. Emotionally responsive. Trusted by feel alone. Morgan and Harper exchanged a look. So if Sage is? Harper began. Eli smiled slightly, but said nothing. Instead, he looked at Morgan and said, Tomorrow, when you take him into that arena, don't think about winning. Just be the one thing Sage has always needed you to be. Someone who never walks away. Morgan nodded, voice quiet and low. I've left a lot behind in my life, but not this horse. Eli left soon after, his shadow disappearing down the hallway, the rusty sign above stall 17 glowing faintly behind him. Later, as the barn settled into silence, Harper sat beside Sage, sketching the slight blister on his lip and writing next to it. Day 1. They tried to hurt him, but he's still standing. Morgan stood at the stall door, leaning against a cracked beam, eyes lost in thought. Brody's words echoed in her mind. Insignificant, maybe. But tomorrow, from that forgotten little stall at the edge of the arena, a wind would blow, and those who laughed would learn how to go quiet. That morning, the sun over San Mateo wasn't the soft, golden light of a dream. It was sharp, relentless, burning into every patch of arena sand, every inch of exposed skin. The air was tense as a drawn bow, not from heat, but from rumor. A new name had begun to ripple through the crowd. Sage. A horse with no pedigree, no headline trainer, no sponsor's patch, just a faded scar on his left flank, a gaze too calm to be taught, and a woman the world had long written off. Morgan Tate stood by the arena's edge, one hand resting gently on Sage's withers. No reins, no bridle, no glittering tack. She had removed the halter back at stall 17. From here on, every cue would come from something unseen. Trust. "We don't need their approval," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "We just need to step out there, like we've survived everything else." Harper stood beside her, arms wrapped around her sketchbook, voice soft like a breeze. "You're not alone, Grandma. I believe he knows exactly what he's doing." Up in the grandstands, Brody lounged with a smirk, elbow propped, chin resting on a knuckle. "Well," he muttered to a companion, "the comedy act has arrived." From the PA system, the announcer's voice rang out. Next up, from Willow Creek, Morgan Tate and Sage, a few polite claps, scattered chuckles. But as Morgan stepped into the arena, alone, with no ground team, no flashy intro, the mood began to shift. Something about the stillness, the simplicity, the defiance. Sage followed her without a sound, step for step, like entering sacred ground. A guitar began to play, not a roaring backing track, not a cinematic orchestra, just the quiet, haunting chords of Wayfaring Stranger. Each note dropped like a whispered memory. The arena held its breath. Morgan didn't speak, didn't bow. She just leaned slightly to the left. Sage responded, rotating his shoulders, mirroring the motion. She shifted her hips. He sighed past across the sand, each hoof lifting in a rhythm so precise it looked choreographed by the wind. A man in a crisp white shirt, second row, leaned toward his wife. No bridle, no crop. How the hell is she controlling him? Then came the classics. Movements rooted in war horses and ancient dressage. Piaf, Sage trotting in place, hooves lifting like dance steps over ghostly wires. Passage, slow, floating strides, suspended between earth and dream. Morgan never raised her hand, never used a word. Every command came through her weight, her posture, her breath. Whispers spread across the stands. "That's impossible. It's not modern technique. It's like he's reading her mind." On the judges' stand, Marilyn Holt, former trainer for the Kentucky Cavalry exhibition team, stood up, eyes wide, mouth parted. "Levade," she whispered. Sage rose slowly onto his hind legs, balanced like a statue sculpted from moonlight and memory. His front hooves hovered just above the dust, poise without strain, control without force. The crowd was silent. Then Morgan reached up and gently unclipped the final rope looped around Sage's neck. No lead, no halter, nothing but breath. Sage bowed, then pivoted, pirouette, a slow spin, hooves dancing in a circle only he could see. The guitar hit its final low note. Morgan didn't bow, didn't wave. She placed a hand on Sage's shoulder, and he lowered his head, resting his chin across hers. It was not a trick, not a rehearsed stunt. It was the greeting of two souls who had walked through fire and never let go. The audience erupted, first a smattering of applause, then a roar. People rose to their feet. Some cheered, some cried, others just stood frozen, unable to process what they had witnessed. In the judge's box, one murmured, "That wasn't a performance, that was a prayer, spoken in movement." Brody said nothing, because what he saw wasn't a washed-up medic and a scruffy Mustang from a desert ranch. It was something he couldn't buy, couldn't train. It was trust, and he'd never had it. Back at stall 17, the walk was no longer quiet. People stepped aside to make way. Someone tipped their hat. A child ran after them, wide-eyed. "Ma'am," he called, "what's your horse's name, the one who danced?" Morgan smiled. "He's a friend." Harper threw her arms around her grandma, eyes wet. "You did it. Not to win, but because they finally saw. They really saw." Morgan didn't reply. She laid a blanket over Sage's back, her fingers pausing on the old scar on his flank, the one she'd once stitched together with bare hands and salt water. Eli arrived minutes later, wordless, offering her a bottle of water and a look full of awe. "You know," he said, "I used to think healing only came through medicine, but today I realized some things don't need treatment or theory, just trust." Morgan nodded slowly. "Sage doesn't need a crowd. He only needed me not to leave him, like I was once left." Eli smiled softly, his eyes gentle. That night, stall 17 glowed. Sage finished every bite of clean hay. Harper sketched every step of the performance from memory. Eli sat cross-legged by the stall, checking Sage's joints one last time. Morgan leaned against the stall door, watching the light shimmer over Sage's silver coat, gentle, like dawn mist. Across the grounds, the McAllister ranch went quiet. Brody vanished, and Hunter, once the self-declared king of Western horses, was on the phone with a lawyer. Sponsors were pulling out. Whispers were becoming headlines. Morgan didn't celebrate. She just felt something deeper settle in her chest. Recognition doesn't come from ribbons. It comes from the moment you prove you and your horse were never uncontrollable. You were just free. And tomorrow, the truth would rise. But tonight, inside stall 17, they had already won. The morning after, the air around stall 17 still carried echoes of the night before. People passing by spoke softer than usual, as if they were walking past something sacred that shouldn't be disturbed. Morgan hadn't changed clothes, still in the same faded shirt and worn cowboy hat. But today, the way people looked at her had shifted. Harper, on the other hand, couldn't hide her glow. She smiled at everyone who came near, eager to share every detail of the performance. But Morgan remained quiet. She knew applause was never the end. Often, it was just the beginning of something heavier. Just before the preliminary results were set to be announced, a stranger appeared in the hallway. He wasn't tall, but there was something about him that made people step aside. Long silver hair touched his shoulders, his deep-set brown eyes seemed carved from canyon stone, and his steps, though slow, felt like they'd split rock. He stopped in front of Sage's stall, said nothing, just stared at the horse like he was seeing something long thought lost. "You looking for something?" Morgan asked, not unkindly but not inviting either. "My name's Nate Bellamy," the man replied. "I co-founded a place called Caldera Springs Ranch, and I once bred a line of horses called Aurelius." Harper's head shot up. She recognized the name from an old book. Aurelius? The bloodline they said was lost? Nate nodded, eyes still on Sage. "One of our mares. Aurelia was pregnant when she was accidentally lost during transport. The man responsible back then was Hunter McAllister." The air turned heavy. Morgan's voice was measured. "You're saying Sage is her foal?" Nate took a slow step forward. Sage didn't back away, didn't move, just watched the man, eyes unreadable but calm. Nate knelt down, gently brushed aside the hair on Sage's inner flank. There it was, a faded birthmark, shaped like a fan blade, just as it had been described in the Aurelius registry. "This mark," Nate whispered, "it only appears in that bloodline. I documented it myself. I never thought I'd see it again." Morgan's jaw tightened. "I found Sage in a ravine near Rattlesnake Gulch. Alone, scarred, starving." "That ravine," Nate said grimly, "is the exact area Hunter claimed Aurelia had gone missing. I always suspected something, but never had proof." Harper clenched her fists. "Well, now you do. Sage is the proof." Just then, Brody McAllister appeared at the end of the hallway. He froze when he saw Nate. The swagger vanished. "Well, if it isn't Nate Bellamy," Brody said, trying to sound casual. "Didn't know you were still in the game? Here to tell old ghost stories?" Nate didn't flinch. "You know exactly what your father did. He let a pregnant mare vanish to secure full rights over the remaining stock. And that mare never died." Brody stepped closer, more cautious now. "My dad told me it was a landslide," he said. "He said no horse could survive, that there was nothing to rescue." Harper's voice sliced through the air. "And you believed him? No report? No search?" Brody didn't answer. His eyes darted between them. Morgan stepped forward. Her voice was low but firm. "You knew. Maybe not then, but you know now. And if there's any decency in you, you'll tell the truth." For a moment, time stretched. Then Brody looked at Sage, at the calm in him, at the unshakable gaze, and something cracked. "My father said, if the horse disappeared, all the paperwork belonged to him. I was 17. I didn't question him, but I remember, he told the driver to drop her where no one would find her. Said she didn't need to make it home." Silence swallowed the hallway. Morgan's hands curled into fists. They left her, knowing she was carrying a life. Nate turned to her. "This needs to come to light." Morgan nodded, eyes drifting to Sage. "Not for me, for him." That afternoon, Morgan and Nate brought every document they had, photos, breeding records, behavioral studies, to the event committee. Harper compiled her sketches. Eli submitted veterinary assessments confirming Sage's neurological responses and muscular structure. An impromptu hearing was held. Morgan spoke plainly. No dramatics, just facts, just the truth. After the session, Marilyn Holt, the head judge, approached them. I've seen hundreds of horses, she said, but none that respond to body cues the way Sage does. Now I understand why. No one trained him to do that, Morgan said. He chose to trust. That night, stall 17 didn't echo with hoofbeats or practice drills. Morgan sat next to Sage, brushing his coat with slow, even strokes. Harper dozed off beside him, curled against the stall wall, sketchbook on her chest. Eli sat outside the stall, watching the quiet. Nate leaned against the fence, eyes focused on the fading light. There's a phrase I learned in the field, Morgan said softly. You can survive the worst things if you have something to believe in. Eli nodded, and someone to believe with you. At 10 p.m., Hunter McAllister showed up, alone. The hallway lights cast his face in alternating bands of shadow and regret. You think you can flip the world upside down with this? He snapped. Morgan didn't stand. I don't have to flip anything. Truth surfaces on its own. You'll gain nothing from this, just a brief windstorm. Then it passes. Morgan looked him dead in the eye. Some winds, she said, leave marks that never fade. Hunter turned away. His gait was slower now, like a man no longer riding tall in the saddle, but dragging behind it, a hollow figure of power long gone. Morgan laid a hand on Sage's neck. In that stillness she knew. Tomorrow, they wouldn't just be survivors anymore. They would be witnesses, to truth, to resilience, to a kind of faith the world had forgotten how to name. The morning sun at San Mateo poured down like a spotlight on a stage yet to be swept. Every walkway near the stables buzzed with people. Not just spectators, but journalists, breeders, trainers, even officials. Word of the McAllister scandal had spread like wildfire. A government-marked truck from the Animal Protection Agency rolled into the complex, signaling the start of a formal federal investigation. Hunter McAllister was suspended from the showcase. An official notice was pinned to the front gate of McAllister Ranch before noon. But for Morgan, that wasn't the victory. Victory was the way Sage looked at her when she fastened the saddle straps, checked his hooves, and whispered at his ear, "Today, you don't have to prove anything, just be who you are." The award ceremony took place in the main arena. The schedule was shortened, many acts canceled. As the showcase organizers prepared a special announcement, the host stepped forward, holding a gold-trimmed envelope, his voice noticeably moved. Ladies and gentlemen, after a remarkable competition, the judges have reached a unanimous decision. The highest honor, Horse of the Year and Most Inspirational Performance, goes not to a pedigree, not to a sponsored act, but to a pair from the dusty valleys of southern New Mexico. Congratulations to Morgan Tate and Sage. The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, even tears. Harper clung to her grandmother's arm, eyes shining. Morgan walked into the spotlight with nothing but her sun-faded hat and the quiet dignity of someone who had endured. When invited to speak, Morgan approached the microphone slowly, like a woman stepping to the edge of an old cliff. I'm not someone who likes speaking in front of people, she began, voice rough but clear. I used to be a medic. My job was to help others survive, not to win prizes. She paused, her gaze drifting toward Sage, who stood off stage, calm, poised, as if he'd belonged there forever. This horse has no papers, no pedigree, no backer, but what he does have is a heart that refuses to break, and I'm just lucky enough to walk beside him. The arena fell silent, so quiet you could hear the flags flapping in the breeze. Then came the applause, thunderous, rolling, not just for a performance, but for a truth finally seen. Weeks later, Morgan received a flurry of invitations from training centers, elite ranches, even documentary filmmakers. She declined them all. The only invitation she accepted was a quiet meeting with Nate Bellamy and a few old allies, people who had once tried to preserve the Aurelius bloodline. They met on a crumbling stretch of land west of Deming, once Nate's ranch. What remained were cracked stone walls, a sagging gate, and brittle soil. But Morgan looked past it all. She turned to Harper and said, "If a wild horse can make this place home, so can we." Months later, Whisper Ridge Sanctuary broke ground. The name was Harper's idea, a place where every voice is heard, whether it's a horse's breath, a silent child, or a soul left behind. The sanctuary had 3 zones: a gentle training space for veterans and trauma survivors, a therapy area for children with disabilities, and a recovery pasture for abused or abandoned horses. No big signs, no sponsorships, just white fences, young trees, and laughter echoing through the valley. Dr. Eli Granger became the sanctuary's lead vet. He brought more than medicine. He brought patience, something Morgan and Harper both knew was sacred when caring for the broken. One spring morning, wildflowers bloomed across the open field. Harper led a group of schoolchildren out for a visit. Among them was a girl named Clara, quiet, with severe social anxiety, afraid to even touch animals. But when she stood in front of Sage, now the soul of the sanctuary, Clara didn't flinch. She reached out and touched his warm muzzle. Sage didn't move. He simply blinked, then rested his head gently on her shoulder. Morgan stood by the fence watching. A smile crept across her face, one she hadn't felt in years. Not pride. Peace. Sage's story continued, not in trophies, but in moments. In each child who found courage, in every veteran who walked back into a barn, in anyone who arrived doubting and left a little more whole. Nate Bellamy wrote to Morgan once, "I spent a lifetime trying to preserve a bloodline, but you taught me something more valuable. You preserved a spirit." And that spirit, gray-coated and wind-kissed, still stood each evening on the western hill beside the creaking windmill, where Harper sketched and Morgan, once a ghost of pain, had finally found home. When the wind passed through, folks said you could hear it whisper, "Thank you for not giving up on me." No one could say whether it came from the girl or the horse, but everyone believed it was real.